guys, and welcome back to another video on my channel. This will be about take 500. Everything that could possibly go wrong while I'm trying to film right now has gone wrong. But yeah, I actually planned on posting this video sooner than now, but things just kept happening. I actually got engaged. I got another puppy. Yeah, so life has been hectic for me. Today is actually the day after Halloween. I was supposed to dress up as Velma, but I ended up just being a skeleton and wearing a skeleton onesie and hanging out with my nieces instead of going out to an actual party. But I'm really curious about what you guys dressed up as if you dressed up. That's like my favorite part of Halloween. It's my favorite holiday. But I hope that you guys had a very happy Halloween. And with that all being said, let's get right into today's video. So when I was researching for today's video, the main topic that I wanted to focus on was cattle mutilation, but I went down a rabbit hole and started to focus mainly on another topic that is related to cattle mutilation, but it actually isn't cattle mutilation. And I was doing so much research on that I kind of went completely off the topic. So there will be talks of cattle mutilation in today's video, but today's video is not based on that, even though that was the plan. Mutilation, also known as bovine excisions and the obvious unexplained livestock murders or cattle mutilations, is just that. Cattle and livestock being murdered under mysterious circumstances. This phenomenon, however, doesn't only affect livestock, it also affects, in some cases, dogs, cats, horses, pretty much any animal that could live in a farm ranch type environment. Between the 60s and 70s, over 10,000 horses and cows alone had been found murdered in the exact same way. These animals had been drained completely of any blood and their sex organs had been removed, and again, there was absolutely not a drop of blood found at any of the scenes where these animals were being found like this. These cases were investigated and all of them came back with absolutely no answers, leaving the people who witnessed this completely terrified and unsettled. This had been happening so frequently that 3 state generals actually got together and demanded that the government investigate this strange and unsettling phenomenon that was happening to people's livestock. The FBI did end up taking on these cases because at this point they couldn't deny that this was not happening, and they investigated these cases over the span of 10 years but came up with nothing, at least nothing that was made public. They never named a suspect, and there was absolutely no explanation that was given to the public as to why this was happening and what could be causing this to happen. Again, these animals are generally found lying on their left side, missing organs, with all of the cuts seemingly being surgical and circular. The animal has been drained of all of its blood. There is no blood or evidence found at the scene, and the whole thing is just really creepy and unsettling if you ask me. The earliest livestock mutilation cases that can be connected to this same series of events takes place in 1606 in London, England. And at this time, the animals that were mostly being mutilated were sheep. And if my research is correct, there was as many as 100 sheep mutilated in just one night in that general area, which is crazy. Okay, so now I want to switch paths a little bit and talk about a case of human mutilation. I couldn't decide if I wanted to talk about cattle mutilation and then the human mutilation, or if I wanted to talk about these in the series in which they happened, which is ultimately what I decided to go with. So we are going from cattle mutilation now to a case of human mutilation, and then we would be going back to talking about cattle mutilation before the video is over. So to start, this case of human mutilation was leaked to the public in the 1960s. And I'm sure some of you on this channel have heard of this case before, as I know we have a lot of UFO and alien enthusiasts who visit my channel. So if I miss anything in this topic, please fill us in the comments down below so that we can all be on the same page. However, I did do my best to not miss anything in this case. And this case that we are going to be talking about right now is best known as the Levette-Cunningham incident. This case is from 1956 at the White Sands Missile Testing Grounds located in New Mexico. This particular military base was used for rocket and missile testing. Major William Cunningham and Air Force Sergeant Jonathan P. Levette worked on this base, and their job there was to collect debris from the successful launching tests. This particular day, these two men were just going about their jobs as per usual. It was a very normal day on the base. It was around 3 a.m. and the men had been sent out to collect debris from an earlier missile testing that was successful. So they set out, and they did end up kind of going like in separate paths, but they were walking directly beside each other. At one point, Levette had walked away from Cunningham, which wasn't super out of the ordinary. Cunningham just assumed that Levette had walked away to go to the washroom or whatever. And so he just continued doing what he was doing. But after a little bit had passed, Cunningham started to get concerned, so he turned around and started to walk in the same direction that Levette had taken off. When all of a sudden, Cunningham heard a blood-curdling scream coming from Levette. He ran up and sprinted over these huge sand dunes, which was the direction that Levette had gone in. And at this point, he was assuming that his friend and colleague had been attacked by either a venomous snake, which was really common in that area, or some other kind of wild animal. But what he would find going on with Levette would change not only his life, but UFO history forever. When Cunningham reached the top of the hill, just 30 feet away from where he was standing, he saw Sergeant Levette being dragged by this long metal black arm-like tube. It was coming down from a silver disc that was hovering about 15 to 20 feet above the struggle. Something to note here is that the silver disc hovering above the struggle was moving completely silently and was an unknown object. It wasn't something that was used by the military or anything like that. Cunningham at this time was completely frozen with fear, while Levette was struggling to get away from this arm-like object. He was punching and screaming and kicking this thing, but to no help to himself. It wasn't doing anything. This thing had a good hold on his arm, and at rapid speed, all of a sudden, the arm shot right back up into the disc, taking Levette with it, and it flew away silently from the scene. Cunningham radioed for help, and soon the area was swamped with every air resource unit and military security searching the entire area looking for any sign of Levette, but turned up with absolutely nothing. Cunningham was completely incoherent at this point, and he just kept repeating that the sergeant had been kidnapped by a UFO. And because of how erratic he was behaving, and because he was the only witness and there was no evidence leading to the fact that this had happened, all of the other people that were in the military that were around at this time thought that Cunningham was having some kind of mental break. It was confirmed by the guards at the sighting center on the base on the evening of the incident that an unidentified radar contact had shown up on their detectors, but it was moving too quickly for any action to be taken against it. Cunningham was then taken to the military hospital for questioning and examination and was kept there for 3 days while being interrogated, and his story never changed the entire 3 days that he was there. Finally, 3 days after this incident had taken place, there was evidence that was found to confirm Cunningham's story, and that was what was remaining of Jonathan P. Levette. He was found 10 miles from where the incident had taken place, and his body was extremely mutilated. When he was found, he was completely naked, and a very clean and super tiny incision was made into Levette's jaw. His tongue and eyes and large parts of his jawbone had been removed and were now completely missing. His penis had also been removed, and his anus had been completely cut out. All of these cuts on Levette's body seemed to be done with a surgical method, and the coroner had said that there was no signs of any organ failure or lung failure or anything like that, and there was not an ounce of blood left anywhere near Jonathan P. Levette's body. Another side note here is there were several dead birds that were found near the body, and that could be taken one of two ways, in which maybe these birds tried to eat Levette's body and that had killed them, or whatever had killed Jonathan P. Levette had also killed these birds. Levette's body was also in extremely good condition when it was found, meaning that it hadn't succumbed to the elements or anything like that, and this led a lot of people to believe that his body was possibly kept in a completely different area, somewhere maybe inside or on that ship or something like that, for the 3 days that he was missing. Initially, when the body was found, Cunningham was arrested and they had planned on charging him with the murder of Levette. However, he was eventually released without any charges and unsurprisingly was allowed to leave the military shortly after that, probably because he was absolutely traumatized by his experience. The government completely refused to even comment on this case, and shortly after this is when the cattle mutilation pandemic would reach an all-time high in Nebraska and Idaho. It was 1967 when the cattle mutilation thing was really publicized, when the Piabo Shafton, which I will put that on the screen because I'm definitely not saying that correctly, published a story about a horse named Snippy that died under mysterious circumstances in Almasa, Colorado. It was September 9th, 1967, when Angus King and her adult son Harry King had found the body of their deceased 3-year-old horse. The horse had been found completely skinned, and according to Harry, all of the cuts on the horse seemed to be done surgically. which is like all of the other cattle mutilation cases that we have talked about in today's video. Angus and Harry also described this weird, sweet, medical-like smell that was surrounding the area where the horse was. The horse had also been drained of all of its blood, and there was no blood left at the scene. Something important to note here is that if this story sounds familiar to you, but you never heard of a horse named Snippy, that is because that was not the horse's name. The person who published this story in the paper got two horses confused. Snippy was another horse that was living on the property, and the horse that had been mutilated was actually named Lady. But obviously, after he publicized this story, he couldn't go back and fix it. So this often gets confused, as the horse is known as Snippy, but its name is actually Lady. So from this point out, while I talk about this horse, I will be referring to it as Lady. The death of Harry King's beloved horse Lady was reported to the police department, but the sheriff dismissed this entire thing, insisting that the horse had been struck by lightning, and refused to even go down to the King's property to examine the scene. In this mutilation case, just like every other mutilation case, there were no footprints, no blood, nothing like that was found on the scene. However, something weird that I did hear that was found on the scene near Lady's body were these tiny little holes that had been poked into the ground, and some of the bushes in the area had been completely flattened. The University of Colorado UFO Investigation Project investigated Lady's case and concluded that the horse Lady could have possibly died from infection, and it said that it was possible that other animals had just eaten her body. However, I don't feel like that's quite right. I don't feel like that's possible, because if other animals had eaten her body and that's why it had all of these cuts and stuff all over it, how would other animals have done it so precisely that the cuts and whatnot on her body seem surgical? This case really had people divided. The locals in the area pretty much thought that the answer from the UFO Colorado University thing was completely BS, and most of the locals in the area chalked up the death of Lady the horse to that of aliens. After this is when there was an absolute huge surge in the cattle mutilation phenomena, and this mostly took place in Idaho, Kansas, and Nebraska. In these cases, the livestock, mostly horses and cows, had their sex organs removed with some kind of sharp object, and it was easy to see that these animals were all being mutilated in a similar fashion. I have talked about cattle mutilation before on this channel when I covered Skinwalker Ranch. That's just a little side note here. But this is something that was very common at that time and still happens today. In 1974, along with these cattle mutilations in Nebraska, something else very strange was happening. There were these crafts, I'm gonna call them, that people say were either airplanes or helicopters, and they were completely unmarked, and they were seen flying over these people's property, shining their lights onto the property just days before people would find these animals mutilated. And again, these helicopters and airplanes were completely unmarked, and they would appear either the day before or the day of these ranchers finding their cattle mutilated. This was happening so often that the air authorities actually had to tell their pilots to increase their height while flying in order to keep themselves safe. Because of the high amount of animals that had been mutilated at this time, and the correlation between these unidentified crafts that were flying over people's property and the mutilation of these animals, the ranchers in this area came up with this kind of like neighborhood watch system where they would sit outside and watch all of their properties well armed, and if anything flew down even close to their property, they would start shooting at it without even a second thought. This leads me to believe that the low-flying crafts in that area that were stalking these ranch properties were UFOs flown by aliens. These cattle mutilation cases seem to have always been very common and still happen today. Human mutilation is a little bit less common, but it's not unheard of. I had done a video in the past about a man in Brazil who had been mutilated in a similar way, so this is something that does happen. Human mutilation seems to be something that is more common in Brazil and South America, whereas the cattle mutilation seems to be more common in North America, and the North American governments seem to just want to brush this under the rug and pretend that it's not happening, whereas in Brazil this is a much more common talked about thing, whereas in these cases the government is really seeming to be searching for answers for these things. But whether you believe that this is happening because of aliens or something else, This doesn't take away from the fact that these are very, very strange things that are happening so frequently that they do need to be investigated. I personally think that there isn't anything else that could be causing this other than aliens, but some people do believe that the government is doing this, or it could be cults or something like that. But again, no matter what you believe, this is like super, super weird and does need to be investigated more seriously. But please let me know what you guys think about this and what you think is causing all of these horrible mutilations. But guys, that is going to bring us to the end of today's video. Sorry if this video was a little bit choppy. I actually had to stop for like an hour in the middle of filming because I guess this video was so long that my camera died. But yeah, if you like this video, please give it a big thumbs up. Don't forget to comment down below what you'd like to see in my future videos, and don't forget to subscribe and turn on that notification bell so that you don't miss any future videos from me. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye guys.